Hello and welcome to another episode of Flipcast. Our guest today is Avinash Pant. He's led marketing over the last 25 years across companies like Coca-Cola, Nike, Red Bull, Meta, and he has experienced the shift in how, not just how marketing works and how consumers function, but really how they connect together in terms of their purchase journeys, in terms of their evolution and relationships. I'm going to be digging into all of that in this episode and so much more. Today's guest is Avinash Pant, and Avinash has been in the marketing space for 25 years, working with some of the most disruptive and, I would say, consumer evolving brands we've had. Everything from Meta and Nike and Walt Disney Company, and I'm going to make a long list, and Red Bull, and it's going to keep going on and on and on. But one of the most impactful things he's actually done is he's been on this wave of how marketing has evolved, how our relationship with consumers has really evolved, and how all of this together has changed the ecosystem. But in many ways, I think he's a believer in the fundamentals, and we're going to get into that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here and always happy to talk about marketing.
Yeah. I want to start off by asking you about your own journey in marketing. Right? If you look at a broader lens of all the companies you worked across, how have you seen yourself as a marketer evolve alongside how the market itself and all the companies you worked with evolved?
Yeah, that's a question that will take a long answer, right? First of all, I should start by saying, Varun, that I am actually super happy that marketing found me. It's not as if I grew up to say, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm just really delighted with the fact that I kind of found marketing as a profession. I found it to be enormously interesting, exciting, rewarding, continues to energize me, to this day. I started my career with the Coca-Cola Company, joined them straight out of business school. And I would say, for that time, this really ages me, right? This is the 90s, the late 90s, and Coca-Cola had just come back into the country. Pepsi was doing some amazing work already in India, had really built a great youth brand. So it was a very interesting, exciting time to join Coke, to start to see how Coke can actually build itself in India. And before I looked up, I had spent 14 years in that company, working across all the brands, including a stint in global marketing in the US, living in the US. Very interesting stints on, driving innovation. So everything from, I would say I learned all my fundamentals there. Everything from running consumer promotions to signing on celebrities for the first time. Coke was learning all of that while I was in the company, to launching water for Coca-Cola, to working on all innovation actually across juices, energy drinks, etc. So like all my growing up in marketing pretty much happened at the Coca-Cola Company. Hugely thankful for that experience. I had a very short stint at Disney. This was again, a company I'm fascinated by. I have mostly, and this is the other theme, I guess, I've mostly worked with brands that are in spaces that I'm passionate about for some reason or the other. It's very difficult. I can't do it to say, hey, here's a very exciting job.
Yeah.
I need to care about,
The
product, the company, the brand. And Disney is one of those companies, though, again, my stint there was, not very long. This was the period of the UTV acquisition and a lot of changes that happened. I then went to Nike, and I'm a sports freak. So that was like, that was a dream job and a half, honestly. My favorite expression to my team always was, we spent a hard day at work discussing cricket for 4 hours, soccer for another 4 hours, and then running for another 3. Like, how does this even work, And I think over this period, I think for me, to your question as well, I have seen so much evolve from probably look at conventional marketing. You look at Nike, really, really strong on social. So start to learn that, start to see that come up and get built up. I went from Nike, I went to Red Bull. And Red Bull is just incredible, right? They kind of redefine how you think about marketing, have a completely different bottom-up approach to marketing. And I always say this to people that, and also never speak about what they do. So like the only way for you to learn about how Red Bull approaches marketing is to work there,
Yeah.
So I had the absolute privilege to work there. And really, I would say a lot around experiential, a lot around content, Definitely very, very strong on social. Of course, you know this very well. And then from there, I came to Meta, first time in tech. So very, very interesting in terms of its pace, its speed, very significant material in terms of reach. And maybe like last thing I'd say there, right? As a marketer, what a fascinating challenge to work on brands that are already like very strong intrinsic part of people's lives.
Yeah.
And yet, at least when I joined them, and yet not clearly have a voice of their own. That was essentially the kind of gist of why I thought it was a really exciting role to take up. And I think, as you said, in your opening question, within that I've seen all the cycles of stuff evolve. I love saying this, right? When I started my career in marketing in the 90s, forget about social media, cell phones didn't exist, right? So I've kind of had a whole span through it all.
And that's also the period when you saw, and I feel that the foundation of marketing has always been the same, right?
Yes.
And what I think tends to happen is that as things change, mobile phones came in, you had the internet kind of become almost a way for us to do more things than we imagined.
Yes.
Then you had social media, then you had e-commerce, you had everything kind of come in. And what people tend to think about is that because of those changes, that marketing itself changed.
Yeah.
But how do you think, have the fundamentals changed?
Oh yeah, this is a topic close to my heart. I think, and let me start, before I come to that, let me start by saying, I think as marketers, amongst our many ills as marketers is this fascination of what's the latest, right? We kind of tend to get on a hyperdrive on that. And I think because of the way technology has evolved and innovation has come in, it's become easier and easier to get into this search for what's the next big thing. But to your point, I think the fundamentals of marketing have never changed, right? And the fundamentals of marketing always go back to the consumer and the fundamentals of human needs and desires. That has never changed. The way to fulfill it has changed. If you have a brand, if you have a product, what are you doing to really instill yourself in the heart and minds of people? Some companies or brands will call it brand love. Some will have another terminology for it. But what are you really doing to achieve that? That has never changed. It never will change, right? The human desire for connection has never changed.
Yeah.
It won't change. The way we get to it has changed completely now, right? We live our lives out of that one phone. In my last job at Meta, we're already talking about the Metaverse, the next generation of how, people will live their lives on the internet. But the fundamental human needs don't change. And therefore, I feel, and again, this is more, as marketers, you will only be as good as your understanding of your consumer. That has never changed. You can talk about various ways in which you can understand more about your consumers, but do you really? And I always like that, the 3 whys principle. Do you really understand the motivation behind why they behave and how they behave? And at the core of it, those fundamentals, honestly, to my mind, they won't change.
You mentioned brand love. I think that's an interesting part to pick up, right? Because we live in a world of performance. We also live in a world of everything from influencer campaigns to e-commerce marketing, everything else. But at the core of it, and I know you and I agree on that, is brand love.
Correct.
How does one look at brand love? Because it's often easier to explain than to derive. And a lot of the brands you work with, I'm picking up Nike as an example, genuinely have so much brand love built over like decades, which still stays. How does a brand truly build brand love?
Yeah.
I'm asking the $1 billion question.
Yeah. This is one of those questions that you don't have an answer for, right? I think what I can share is probably just in terms of examples. I think because I've had the great fortune of working in these companies. One of the things I noticed with brands that do an exceptional job at this is they seem to be quite convinced about what works for them. And Nike and Red Bull are both great examples of that.
Yeah.
And they don't actually kill themselves trying to measure it. It's the classic Heisenberg's principle,
Yeah.
You want to split it fully apart and say, oh, this precise thing is helping build brand love. You probably won't find the answer.
Yeah.
And again, I think each one of us has, our own hypotheses on this debate. I think, and Nike, therefore, to my mind, consistently does that very well. Doesn't mean that they don't measure metrics. Doesn't mean that they don't try and understand whether the brand is, in its connection with consumers is improving or not, but they don't obsess over it. In my 3 years there, I never saw Nike research an ad, just as an example. And Red Bull is probably even further along in that journey, in the sense of their even deeper understanding that what builds brand love. To your point, experiences build up, right? And as I span across my career, brand and identity of brand was usually this idea of that one ad that you made and you invested so much behind, spent 6 months doing, versus it's actually when they interact with you as a product, or they interact with you as an experience. In the case of Red Bull, that can. So the unfortunate part is there isn't a single answer on what builds brand love. But if I had to hypothesize, I would say, are you clear about who you are? And I think this is where a lot of brands already lose. Forget about, have I hired the greatest team to do this, and do I have the coolest cutting edge campaign? Are you clear about who you are, what you stand for? Yeah. Is your voice clear? Is it unmistakable? I always say this, right? Whenever I see work, and work can mean anything from a brand, can I take away the brand and I know unmistakably that it is you? If you've done that, then this is before you create anything, right? Then you have something to stand on. And then are you doing all the right things to build those connections with consumers? And again, sitting in the age we are today, that can mean anything and everything. I think the difference between where I started and now is probably there'll be 100 different touch points to what could have been that one film, 25 years ago. And I know this is a very long answer, but the last thing I'll say, because you mentioned performance and brand love, almost like these are, somehow not in the same space. I have always believed that the best marketing is the right confluence of art and science. So this idea that marketing is only art, coming just from the creative lens, or marketing is pure performance, or it's only data analytics. Well, it needs to be both, and I think both is possible. That's at least my POV on it.
I actually agree with you on that, because remember sometime back, I think it was a chat I was having with the creative director, and I was saying that data is actually your creative juice.
Yes.
What you understand about your consumers, what drives your creative vision and what you're creating. And now you have a lot of that, and you have a lot of understanding of consumers, because consumers have a lot of brands which are attracting them. I think a normal consumer today has way more brands focused on them than ever before in the world. And in that lens, do you feel that the consumer has changed in terms of how they interact with the brand, what they want out of a brand, or rather what they expect out of
it? The fundamental starting point for me is the fundamentals don't change, right? So I think keeping that aside, I think a lot has changed in behavior just over time, and with all the things that have happened right in our lives. I think to your point, maybe you could rewind 20, 30 years ago and say, hey, the core of what a brand really meant is just an affirmation of quality, right? You're generic, and here is a brand name on it. Like you go to the classics of what is branding really, right? That's what it meant maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. I think increasingly what you see, and I've been lucky enough to work in the youth space, so there's also years of research one has seen around it, right? People care about who you are and what you stand for. They really do, and so therefore, one, of course, it's not just who you are as a product, it's also what you stand for as a brand. And that can mean many things. It doesn't necessarily only mean the idea of, are you doing something great in the social space? Though increasingly, we are seeing that is something people really care about. It doesn't mean whether they themselves in their personal capacities are doing something or not, but they do care about that the brands that they bring into their lives do have a point of view, maybe are actually doing, something. So that's just, that's just one example. I feel in many ways, consumers are way more aware today than they were before. Again, one of my biggest learnings, or something I've always carried with me, is that as marketers, we don't give enough credit to consumers. Consumers always run 3 steps ahead of what you would expect or never expect to happen. They're always ahead. So when I'm saying this, I'm not questioning the intelligence. I'm just saying, given the world we live in today, they have so many sources of information. They're just way more aware today than they were before.
Yeah.
Which means, therefore, as a brand, and if you look at it from the other side of it, you've got to be so much more watchful, even, right, in terms of, hey, what's getting talked about? What is it that's coming to it? Because way back, it could be that one campaign, that one spokesperson or celebrity.
Yeah.
Versus a world today that each and every person has a voice and they can express it really, really well.
Yeah.
So yes, I think there is, in that sense, I would argue there is massive change for sure.
I think the interesting part also about the Indian market is that there was always this thought that India follows global trends, and over time we kind of realized that if you look at the Indian market and the Indian consumer, a lot of the stuff that might be predominant, let's say in Western markets, doesn't stick. And you also worked with a lot of brands which are global brands kind of come into India. And then it often becomes this case of, okay, let's Indianize what is an international concept. But how do you look at the Indian consumer today? And how do you truly create for them? Or are you saying it still kind of works, kind of just say, I'm almost giving you an answer here, but I'm going to let you take it from there.
No. I think it's a very interesting debate. I'm laughing because I have funnily been on both sides of this debate. So I'll first share that anecdote because I grew up in marketing in India, working at the Coca-Cola company, always advocating for the fact that it is unique. It is not one. I used to always joke, being a brand manager in India means you're like a brand manager for many countries, right? Where the languages you don't know. I used to supervise and approve, language edits of films where I had no idea about the language, right? So it is, of course, complex and it is unique, without a doubt. And then I moved to global marketing. I was responsible for Fanta as a brand globally. And I just always share this anecdote because then I had the Italians telling me the next day that they're unique.
Yeah.
Then China is telling me that they're very unique. South Africa is incredibly unique. And you have this interesting puzzle of how do you stitch this uniqueness together to an identity that is global. So I've been on both sides of that debate, to be fair. But I think there is just no doubt when you look at the size and potential of India, when you look at how vibrant this economy is, I don't think there can be any brand today, global brand, that can not recognize that fact and work very hard to create uniquely for India. I think that will be consistently true. There are just so many examples, even from my own life. I think Thumbs Up is maybe the best one I can take from back when, right? You look at the might of Coke and Pepsi globally, and you look at this homegrown drink, which is a little spicier. And you just see the continuing appeal, even to this day. I worked on Thumbs Up, when I was at the company. And that's just one example, right? But there are just so many examples across my career of having to think uniquely for India. When I worked at Nike, it was interesting because cricket was such a clear, signifier. If you had to build a sports brand in India, then you had to be about cricket. But it was unique to Nike because Nike didn't do work on cricket, and Nike is an innovation company, right? So Nike wouldn't just sponsor something. They would want to be able to develop product in that space and build a business around it, which to an extent, I guess, I would say was always a struggle maybe. But I've seen this, to your point, across companies. Red Bull is masters at localizing and going really deep, So I used to be fascinated. To your point, it wasn't me, trying to espouse the cause of us doing local work in India. Red Bull was incredible in their intent to say, no, find us something unique. I mean, we created an event for Dahi Handi. Like how unique is that? Red Bull Jod Ke Tod as an example. Or a volleyball tournament in Kerala, because volleyball is just so big once you enter the interiors, So I mean, again, it's kind of a long-winded answer. The last one I'll share from my Meta days is, of course, and something that's such an integral part of our lives is Reels. The company hadn't yet found product market fit when we were starting to see Reels explode in India. So, it was massive credit I would give to the company to actually do something first off in India. And then, of course, it kind of became massive after that. So many examples.
The reason I asked for the Indian consumer also was because we're such a mobile first market. I feel a lot of other countries and markets started off went to the traditional route of you had offline, and then you got laptops, and then you eventually got some form of mobile and this. I feel a lot of us kind of skipped
Yeah.
straight to the phone and straight to e-commerce, straight to online payments and everything
Correct.
else. And there was a part when that big jump happened. I would say the period of the pandemic led to this huge jump towards, okay, how much of the mix is digital? And you also would refer to it as advertising and digital advertising. And then everything became advertising and marketing, right? The digital kind of just sometimes stopped even being asked. How do you feel this entire part? Because e-commerce did one thing was that it stopped making marketing just a marketing channel, but also made it a sales channel because
Correct.
you could finally sell products through marketing. A two-part question here. How do you think that changed just the dynamic of how you looked at a marketing team, how you looked at how you would look to market to a consumer? And also, how do you see that change the role of, marketing in general?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think the entire e-commerce journey has been, for me, honestly, even as a marketer or a student of marketing, as I say, it's been so educative in the sense that, going back to the point I was making earlier about consumers are always 2 steps ahead.
Yeah.
I love saying this, that back in the day, if someone, before, the entire e-commerce boom, if someone told me someday that you'd be buying jewelry online, I'd be, you must be nuts. There's no way that's happening, right? And to see that and come to a time where, and especially around the pandemic, since you mentioned, right, I had joined Meta at the time. In fact, we did a report on this where we were seeing, again, yet again being surprised by the pace at which consumers adopted, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there was a situation that forced them to. I can't step out anymore to check things and to figure things out. I'm just finding the easiest ways to get stuff to myself because that's all I need at this time. And e-commerce, was a fantastic platform. And even then, when you look at it from the idea of, let's say, startups or D2C companies today, or even in terms of the idea that it's not just about marketing, it's not just about delivery. I could potentially complete the entire chain here, right? As long as I'm present here, I can, give you a proposition. And I can find, the marketing aspect is just finding the right consumers with the right proposition. That can happen right here on the platform. You can order it and you can have it, right? It kind of short circuits the entire thing. And it's honestly been very fascinating to observe. And I think, from a broader marketing lens, as you said, this idea of, fundamentals don't change in marketing, right? Where are your consumers? What are they doing? How can I reach them? And it's incredible in terms of, in the e-commerce journeys, how all of this could be, put together. And this is the fascinating thing I was saying earlier, right? How consumers are way ahead, 2 steps ahead of marketers, right? I think, and you made that point, right? How India has been unique in how we've leapfrogged technologies, right? The desktop just never happened, right? And that's simply because consumers are always smart and they'll find a way. If you make it accessible to them, give them easy access to data, make mobile phones a little bit cheaper, they will find a way to make it work for them. And I think that's exactly what has happened in this space.
Yeah. And I feel the interesting part also with e-commerce and it's the companies like Flipkart is that they've also gone from just being platforms to buy from to being platforms you can advertise from. So suddenly as marketers, you didn't just look at it as an end point, you looked at it as a starting point of how you actually connect with the consumer, how you advertise to them. I'd like to go into that part a little bit, right? Because we always looked at things in silos in marketing, but now it's almost like worlds merge in terms of what's a marketing platform, what's a sales channel, what are your touch points for the consumers. How does the marketer of today deal with that? How do you look at it and say, okay, how do I navigate this entire aspect of things?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating question. I think I'll always go back to the idea that certain things haven't changed. Like to me, at least the way I grew up in marketing was the classical brand marketing where you're responsible for everything. So it wasn't only about creative. It wasn't only about campaigns. It was your classical product marketing. So you are worried how you're performing. You are wondering about, what's moving, what's not moving. You're actually tracking all kinds of data to look at how your metrics are, how your brand performance is. So that's at least the fundamentals from where I come. But what you're right about is, at least in those days, sales was different, right? So it was a whole different team. I think when I think about, and I'm kind of evolving your question to like the role of CMO today versus, let's say, a few years ago is definitely, you need to be aware about a lot more, for sure. And yes, I think the one big difference I will say, it doesn't stop with saying, hey, this is only marketing. I think that's what you alluded to as well. You are actually responsible for the business end to end. Because it isn't as if the marketing channels are separate from the sales channels. It's literally is all merging together. And in fact, the smarter you are about that, whether it's platforms of e-commerce like Flipkart that you mentioned, or it's the work you're doing through influencers, which can directly be sales channels by themselves. So just needing to be aware of a lot more. And if I think back 10 years versus now, also I would say, and that has always happened, is the pace of change, right? The pace of change is quite incredible. So so here's another new platform which seems like it'll take over everything now. And are you ready for it? Have you thought about it? How are you looking to incorporate it into what you do? And I think, to my mind, that's one of the ways to solve for this, though, that hasn't changed. Because I keep going back. Are you building the right team? And when I say team, it isn't just your direct team. It's also who are the partners you work with. And there is a way for you to solve for this, to be better aware, to be better armed, to be able to reach out to your consumers. And I think, to me, that has not changed. The way to get to it is definitely changing, right? Do you have enough young people in your team? That is going to be my constant point, even as I age. So,
Speaking of young people, I feel another aspect kind of comes into this mix is attention span. Right? And attention span doesn't just come across the content you consume, it comes across in, let's say, the advertising you see, or the marketing you're subjected to, or the products you're kind of looking for. Do you agree with this entire attention span aspect because of the fact that you're saying, okay, younger people don't have attention, so you got to throw a lot more at them, you got to do it differently? And does that actually play into the fact that you need more young people in marketing teams?
Interesting. This is again one of those questions which is actually hard to answer, in the sense that it's not just about young people. I think in our lives today, we have media kind of coming at us from every direction, right? Gone are the days, and sometimes I think about them very fondly, where there was just one TV channel and you made this one film that everybody saw, and just kind of solved your lives, right? So it's I don't think it's as much about attention span. It's about what's coming at people, right? So so the point is, the job of marketing has always been to be able to stand out, right? That's your job. You need to be able to stand out. And I would say yes, to a great extent, that job is harder today. You need to think a little bit harder, even harder, because you're doing it in an environment that is extremely chaotic. It's not, I wouldn't even say busy, it's just chaos, right? What it doesn't necessarily mean, though, because one of those, I have this thing that truisms bother me. Anything which you say, oh, this is the answer, I will fight to say, let me give you 10 examples why
There's no magic pill.
Yeah, because then the truism becomes, first 3 seconds. And I worked at Meta, right? First 3 seconds, man, first 3 seconds, right? What is true for sure is when I have so much of choice, you can't do a very slow build up for me because I have so much of choice. I'm just going to swipe and move. So sure, you do have to grab my attention. For sure, you do. But what always wins is true, compelling, authentic storytelling, right? So do you have a compelling story to tell? You can have all the attention from me, So I think for me, both of those are kind of realities in themselves.
Yeah. And I asked about attention span also because content, again, being almost an output of marketing. It's so core, and you've worked at Red Bull, and so content is such a core part of the entire marketing mix and how we look at consumers. And because you're not seeming like advertising being thrown at them. You're seeming like content you would consume anyway. And that's become such an ingrained way for, brand love to be built for long-term connections as well. How does content play into the team that works on marketing within an organization, and even for the CMO's mind? But how do you think that's really changed how the relationship between a brand and a consumer is?
I think this idea of content marketing, right? I think it's an incredible one. My first glimpse of this, by the way, was I think I used to work at Nike then, and a man jumped from space.
Yeah.
And I still remember, this was before I joined Red Bull. I remember I collected my entire team at Nike the next day.
Yeah.
And I was like, what was this? Like, as students of marketing, what was this? This wasn't an ad, for heaven's sake, right? This broke the internet then. We didn't even know, what that term meant then.
Yeah.
And just, so Stratos, Red Bull Stratos, of course, I understood more about it later. But, and the only reason I'm using this example, for me, it was one of the first examples is, it's not as if you start by saying, oh, I'm going to market to you through content. Hey, I have something truly compelling for you that I've obviously been very careful to, to capture.
Yeah.
But I have something truly compelling. And that's why one of the reasons I use that example is I see so many brands, and I've been to forums where companies will, ask about, oh, we're struggling with content marketing. But the point is, do you have a story to tell? And have you thought hard enough about it? Then we can find ways and means for you to connect. And I think to your point, it is supremely important because consumers are now pretty wary of advertising. And one of the things I love to say, and I'm sure, many people have said it before, right? Consumers can smell bullshit a mile away. Like they really can, And I think over time, I think everyone's gotten quite wary of advertising, right? If you're talking to me, there's already a problem here, right? And therefore, content becomes super important. To your point, being able, and that's the job, right? Being able to identify what is a great, compelling story to tell, being able to be authentic with it, being able to capture it well. And capture it well doesn't necessarily mean always a fancy setup and the most expensive camera. It's just that, hey, do I have a point of view from which I want to tell this story, right? So I would say it's one of those pieces that a lot of brands and a lot of companies are kind of trying to solve for. But it is something that requires slightly harder work. It is something that requires maybe a broader, I'd almost argue, point of view. Again, connecting back to, do you have enough young people? Do you have enough people who can look at something and say, hey, listen, I just don't know why. I don't know why I would listen to this story.
I'm glad you said that the connection was this, right? Because oftentimes we use the term branded content, but it actually is content that's been told by a brand,
right?
Which is a whole different way to look at it. And what it also kind of does is that I feel in the long term, you look at the brand differently because they're telling a story you connect with, like you just said.
Yes.
Do you feel that also, in my mind, that would be performance marketing as well, is that it's a slower version of it, but you're helping build a stronger bond with the consumer while you have the fast-paced stuff going alongside it. So if you had...
Yeah, no, sorry. I just jumped in, but you want to finish your question?
No, please go ahead.
No, it's such a great thread, right? The idea that, and I'll always react to it, right? The idea that, oh, this is performance and this is brand. It just doesn't work that way, right? I have various ways of catching your attention and telling you something that can help me as a brand. Now, help me can mean many different things. Because I'm biased to brand love, anything that makes me rethink you in a material way is actually helpful. It can be quite transactional even because the content is something interesting that you see. And by the way, the shots that the guy is wearing as you see it are actually clickable to an ad on Instagram, and you can actually get them, right? So the connections can be built any which way. So, so in that sense, everything is performance and everything is brand. But being able to kind of think through that piece and being able to find ways to connect to that story definitely plays a very big role.
Do you also kind of feel that the word community gets thrown around a lot more easily, right? Because look at how do you build an audience,
right?
And oftentimes you're looking at building an audience to just drive sales. But sometimes you're building an audience to build a deeper connection, see what else you can kind of do with them, to eventually lead to sales. Is there a shift in how you build community around the brand now?
I think the very fact that we started to talk about community, I think, is quite interesting, right? Again, you can go back to the classical to say, listen, it was always about a community, right? Here are people who love my brand. That's kind of my community. Maybe they were easier to reach than, as I said, in the simpler times with a single media channel. But I would say yes. I think this is one of the bigger things for marketers to kind of think harder about today is around community. And I say this from a lens that it isn't about the size only, and it isn't necessarily only about, hey, I want to, I can then sell to this community. That will come for sure. But it's the idea of, do I have people who care about something? And again, this is something I learned at Red Bull, right? It doesn't matter. Their numbers don't matter. It can be 100 people who passionately care about something. Can I play a material role in their lives?
Yeah.
Is there a way I can help this community? If that help is authentic, it's genuine, right? That will blow up. I think hip hop is a great example in India. I think it's a perfect example, because the hip hop community is not a massive community, but hip hop culture is quite massive now. And of course we've had our own swings with it. But I remember being back at Red Bull, we were doing a documentary of Divine before any of the tamasha with the movie and everything else happened. Before it became really, really massive. Or the work with B-boys, in India, B-boys and B-girls, again, a very small community. I'm just using that example to illustrate the point that the community itself can be small, but how you connect with them and what you do with them, which needs to be authentic, can actually help you both give an idea to a larger body of consumers who you are and what you stand for, and they can kind of connect with that. So and you can take that forward. So that's just the notional, let's say, the brand love idea, because now you've planted the performance thought in my mind since you asked me twice. You look at it also from a very material perspective today, right? When we're looking at an age going forward, where you may not have cookies, so first party, right? So for a lot of companies, for a lot of brands, man, do I have first party information? What is it going to take for me to be able to talk to my consumers directly? Starts to become material as well. And therefore that's another sense, maybe almost you can say a more transactional sense of building community, which is, I would say, is incredibly important. It's just that you have to be very careful. Why should they care? In fact, that's one of my favorite questions, when ideas get pitched, or even as companies, as brands have come up with stuff, it's like, why should they care? People say, oh, I want them to log on to my website. Yeah, but why? Who's going to a website? Unless you're doing something quite incredible there, why should they care to log on? Which is, the smarter ways to get first party information. So yeah, I think that's the space. But I would definitely say that communities, the strength of communities, also because communities, you listen to other voices that are very, very important. It isn't just the brand talking to you. That's another reason why community is important. I can, maybe another example. Let me just use one other example. When I used to work back at Nike, we used to find that, let's say the running communities, they had their own gurus, and these are not the celebrities that you otherwise look at, who would be talking about the shoes that actually work for them, right? And you're trying to figure, hey, how do I actually start to work with these communities? How do I get them to try out Nike shoes? To specifics, the pegs, the Air Pegasus, whichever running shoes, and I'm talking specifically on performance right now. How do I get this community? How can I be authentic part of this community, and what can I do? And I think in the Nike example, Nike Run Clubs was a great initiative, very genuine initiative, almost altruistic initiative. I'm like, when I joined the company, I was like, really, this is what we're doing? We're like showing up every weekend, at Kantirwa Stadium in Bangalore and saying, just show up. Don't care what you wear. We will help you become a better runner. Well, what an authentic approach to building community, right? Then people understand that you actually care about this, and you can now start to be a part of that. Many. Sneakerheads is another great example, right? When I was at Nike, there was no sneaker culture in India. And we were just at that initial stage of trying to figure, hey, what is it going to take to do that? And I remember, because I mentioned earlier, right, building the right partnerships. I remember working with Homegrown in their very early days. And Varun be in our office, and we'd be like, okay, now what can we start to do to kind of work around sneaker culture? And I think now it's pretty much very alive in India, as I can see.
I think the interesting part with communities is that it also kind of moved brands from looking at just celebrities or let's say endorsers to saying working with influencers. But what that also meant was the brand has kind of let go of a few of their brand mandates and meet the influencer or creator halfway, because it won't seem authentic to the creator if they make everything look like what the brand might want. So do you feel the way a brand looks at these interactions versus how you'd work with, let's say, a celebrity or an endorser, that's shifted how you even do marketing of that aspect?
Oh, yeah. This is such a big topic. I go back all the way when I started my career. I said, we were setting up relationships and working with celebrities or ambassadors to the world of today. And actually, I'll tell you an anecdote which happened to me a few years ago. I think I'd gone to speak, I won't say which company, I'd gone to speak on marketing to a company, where they had all their marketing people together. And one of the questions that came to me at the end of the talk was, we've heard you talk about influencers, and we actually tried to do an influencer campaign. But our problem is that they're not sticking to guidelines, and they're not following the protocol. And my counter question to her was, are you trying to make, what are you trying to create? Because what it sounds to me like, you're trying to create 100 ads with influencers. So that's the classic dilemma of, maybe, I would say that's changed already, but I think I can look across brands and say, this is something companies and brands are learning how to do better. Because the most important ability is that ability to lose control and to give control. Now, if you go back to the basics, like going back to my favorite theme, right? Your brand exists in the hearts and minds of people. Just getting comfortable with that idea in the first place is hard, right? It's not a manufacturer mentality of saying, this is who I am. You are what people believe you are. And I think my favorite story on that is, of course, from my Coke days, is New Coke, right? The whole story of New Coke. I won't get into that now. But you are what people think you are, right? And I think this is something you want people to connect with and talk about, what they like about you. So if you're saying, especially since you said influencers, and they have their own voice. That is why they are followed. That is why you're actually going to them in the first place. Yeah. So to try to curtail their voice and say, hey, can you say this for me? But here are the 18 rules and exactly the color and everything else that you need to work with, is definitely not going to happen. But I notice and I see, and in my job at Meta, I was very fortunate to kind of work with a lot of influencers. We work on the Creator Day work where we met with so many of them. So they all talk about the idea that, hey, working with brands can be hard, but at the same time, it's actually changing significantly. And I think some of the better work that you're seeing out there is where, you're able to marry well, what is it that you want to say, and then allowing an influencer to speak it, one, in their voice, and two, to their audience, right? Because their audience is different. Yeah. I can't go to you with a brief which is, talking to someone else, and you're like, but this is what my audience kind of connects with, right? Yeah. Or more importantly, this is who I am. Yeah. So I think when we were saying earlier, it's that much harder for marketing or CMOs to do that work, to say what will be that set of people. And I think one of the big and more important things here is not to fall down the trap of numbers alone. Therefore, it isn't. If all you're caring about is what is the following, then you go back to your celebrity days, right? You got to care about authenticity and connection, and that is going to actually take you much further.
We've spoken a lot about how things have shifted, but if you have to look a little further ahead, considering again the chaos, like I think you used the perfect word for the world in which brands live in today. What are you seeing as shifts moving ahead in terms of how brands and consumers interact, how they're marketed to, and also how they buy things from brands?
I feel like, you talk about the future. It's like, are you even allowed to have this without talking about AI, right? Like, it's just one of those things that bothers or bugs me, right? I keep saying this, right? Our fascination for, hey, what's next? And I think AI is definitely one of those massive pieces that we are seeing in many ways is kind of disrupting or making us at least question things, right? So I definitely feel that's one piece which we are already starting to see come up. When I worked at Meta, the company rebranded itself. That's how deeply the company believed in the next generation of the internet, so to say. And I think that's the right way to look at it. Again, terms makes us, again, fall in love with terms and say, oh, it's all about the metaverse. Where is the metaverse? Is it coming now? But I think suffice to say, what technology is going to keep doing is bringing a lot more innovation into our lives. And I think as you think about the future, while the fundamentals don't change, maybe the ways to get to them might change, right? So as an example, when you talk about AI, today, I need to find various ways and means of creating content that is compelling to connect with consumers across audience sets, across things that I might need to talk about. potentially what AI can do is make it easier,
Yeah.
right? I can find ways and means to do that. That doesn't mean that AI will decide everything for me, but therefore it's the judicious use of technology, which is how it's always been, to be able to get it to do what you want done. And I think those are just some of the examples to me. As at least, I mean, I don't consider myself honestly an expert. The very fact that this is emerging means there must be some young person who knows this much better than I do, and I should ensure that they're a part of the team, as I was saying earlier. But there are things that will continue to happen, and our ability to use that to shape and create and play with what can be done. So some of the obvious, easier ones to my mind that at least come is, hey, we're talking about content. We're living in a world where, from 1 to 100 to 1,000 is not enough.
Yeah.
And that's where AI can, at least from what I can see already, can play a pretty significant role in helping you, do things. So those are some that I see. And like I said, a little further down the road is this whole idea or conception of, if our world today is on a flat screen on a phone, if this is the conception of the internet for now, how does that emerge and evolve in the future? And what does that mean for brands and for experiences? Because it again disrupts completely. And it isn't just about marketing, honestly. It is really, I can run my business like that. I remember we used to say, hey, if I'm a bank and I'm in the metaverse, what does it mean? And the answer from the bank was, I can create a branch in the metaverse. And it's like, no, you're not thinking hard enough. Why does it have to be a branch? What is my banking in the metaverse, right? What are my various investment options, etc., and how can I just do that? So just, again, maybe a complete distraction or as an example. I think those are the fundamental big things I see coming. I don't know. I haven't thought of much else. I think the entire fragmentation. I think that's the other piece to think about, right? If I look at my own journey in marketing from one to many to one to one almost now, what does that mean, right? Because the democratizing of voice, in a way, has ensured that all of us have a voice, which we are, trying to make ourselves heard. So the way I think about it is, you say influencers today. When I think about tomorrow, I don't even know what that means, because every individual, in some ways, is an influencer. Right now, I can't even conceptualize what that means, for maybe 5 years down the line. But I feel that is also going to be its own disruption in a way.
And I think the core of what you're saying is that the experiences might evolve, or the tools might change, but the fundamentals stay the same. That's never going to change. Right? That's the core of it. It's
I'm a stuck record on that one, like I am.
So we have a few quick fire questions for you.
Okay.
The idea is to get, I've been told one word or one line answers, but I'm going to leave that to you to judge and give that. What are some of the emerging trends in marketing to watch out for?
I think the rise of creator marketing, the rise of influencers, which we spoke about, and what that means from a 1:1 perspective and voice. I think that would be, for me, that's probably one of the biggest that I can see for now.
What's your career advice for young marketers?
Work hard, care about the consumer, don't chase titles.
What does it mean to be a brand?
To exist in the hearts and minds of people.
Excluding anything you worked on, what's your favorite Indian ad and why?
Fevicol. Very quick, actually. Because, of course, the whole Fevicol campaign, this can't be a short answer. But the reason Feviquick comes to mind is, way before we knew short form, they had such a punchy thing. Like, the film was incredible. I always remember it. Funny, humorous.
The fishing one.
The fishing one. Yeah. The thing is how well it adapted to 5-seconders. Like, I've seen it for years after. I don't know how many years they used it. Lasting value. Way ahead of its time.
As soon as you said that.
Way ahead of its time.
Favorite book or podcast or article about marketing?
I don't have a favorite because I hardly hear any. Advertising is dead is the only one. Funnily enough, I don't have a favorite because my answer is, I like to live many lives. So when I listen to podcasts or other stuff, it's in the other areas of interest I have in my life, which is either running or cycling or endurance or everything but marketing. So that's the weird answer.
And the final one, what's the difference between Diet Coke and Coke Zero? Is it just branding?
No. There is a difference. When Coke Zero was created, Coke finally cracked a diet version of Coke that tasted much like Coke, which was great for people like me who love the taste of Coke and never liked the taste of Diet Coke. But by then, Diet Coke had a massive following and people who just loved the taste of Diet Coke and couldn't care about the taste of original Coke anymore. So it's such an interesting thing that they had to create a third brand, which was actually the truer diet taste version of Coke. So yeah, that's why I'm a big Coke Zero fan, because I never liked the taste of Diet Coke.
So I'm a Diet Coke person. Yeah. I totally get what you're saying. When you look at the entire connection between brands and consumers, how do you think the purchase journey has really changed? How has that really evolved over time, especially with everything that's kind of gone on, with digital kind of coming and becoming an entire channel?
Yeah, massive change, right? I mean, back to the days when I was a kid and, you walk out of home with a specific idea of what you're looking for to purchase, to, to the entire journey is kind of shifting online, to searching for stuff, to, today actually seeing a reel that you like, and then suddenly you realize that, you can go right from there, for example, to pick it up. I think I would say it's all been short-circuited now. So brands can find great ways to be able to, and short-circuit is the best word for it, because at the end of the day, you're in a business, right? So, hey, how can I get consumers to buy me? Well, you can actually get to it very, very quickly versus a much more elaborate process earlier. That's what I would say.
And it's interesting you said that about how leaving the house with a specific thing that you want to buy. And now with e-commerce, what you actually have is you're going and you're discovering newer things, and sometimes end up finding things which you didn't really know you needed, but you do, and you add them in as well. So you become a discovery platform as much as you become a platform where you purchase and connect with the brand.
And actually even deeper than that, right? I think e-commerce has played such a transformative role almost, right? In terms of, it isn't just that. Then you understand the consumer better. You're able to suggest them other things that they might not even have thought of yet, right? Because, people who bought this also bought. And it's like, oh yeah, I never thought of that. I got the iPad, but now I need the fancy cover. Oh, I need this and I need that. And also over time, being able to then personalize better, right? Because we may, in other words, we may not like that term, but when it's making things convenient for us, we find that to be truly transformative. So I think, in fact, I would actually hypothesize that now consumers almost expect that hyper-personalization, right? So if I'm on an e-commerce site and, I'm like, what? Oh, you know me already. What are you doing? Like, I expect you to give me even better options, for example. So absolutely, I think it's been quite transformative, even from a brand lens, therefore, to kind of complete the entire journey, even, right? That's all of that is possible.
Yeah. Even how your store looks, right? Even how it looks when it's, let's say, on a Flipkart, and then you're kind of going into it, or if you're looking at how that's connected to something you bought in the past and you're getting the suggestion, like you said.
Correct.
Over time, I think you understand yourself as a consumer a lot more, as well as not just the brand understanding you, you understand yourself as a consumer. So I feel that's also driving deeper understanding of self through e-commerce.
No, absolutely. I mean, as you said, I think it's been quite transformative, and the ability that it has to actually package everything in, right? So as marketers or as brands, allowing you to actually complete the entire journey. I think that's quite incredible.
You said something interesting. You said that, does a brand have a story to tell? But how do I, as a brand, figure out what my story is? What is the story that I should be telling?
Not as easy. To be fair, not as easy to answer that. But I think what I also meant as a brand, have you done the soul searching? To actually, the one step before that is, who am I and what do I stand for? And I think that piece is important in today's day and age. Then when you're clear about who you are and what you stand for, and maybe a sense of what your voice is, then the idea of what is the story that I can tell, or is will be powerful or meaningful, starts to become important. And then the entire craft of storytelling kind of follows up. I think one example that I can share in my early days it was called Facebook then, just when the pandemic was happening, and we were seeing incredible stories, right? That's the whole idea of Facebook. It's the idea to build community, right? And allowing people to build community and bring the world closer. And we were seeing people reaching out and helping, and we thought that this is a story worth telling. But then that was a crafted story. Of course, Pooja Didi was this film, and I'm very, very, very close to it because it was such a compelling idea which defied all norms of the time. We were Facebook. We are about short form. We're telling people, hey, 3 seconds, 5 seconds. And this was a story of 7.5 minutes that we told, which is about this girl, running a milk center in Punjab. And to my mind, the reason I share this is, and even for marketers, really, is like this whole idea of being able to go with your gut to say, hey, I think this is something compelling to tell. You can actually break norms because it became truly viral, right? I mean, of course, with all the metrics of at Facebook, we know how well it did on the platform, but you can't measure the way it did on WhatsApp. I mean, I was getting it on my community WhatsApp groups in my building. That's when I knew that, oh wow, this has really worked, because now it's getting forwarded to me. And it was truly compelling. So again, of course, the privilege of having a lot of access to a lot of stories, but I would go to the basics of what do I stand for, what do I really care about, what is my voice, and then therefore what is the story that I can tell.
Thank you so much for doing this, Avinash. I think we've gone through the entire plethora of fundamentals of looking at how performance, content, brand love, even stories to tell have all kind of come together. Thank you so much for coming on Flipcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I think this was amazing fun, and I can just keep going on talking about marketing. So thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Flipcast. Make sure you hit subscribe and click on that bell icon to be notified for future episodes. And if audio is your medium, then Flipcast is available on all audio platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Geo7, BingePods, and more. So till the next one, keep Flipcasting.